Support for WPR comes from the Shawamigan Theater Association. Bilbo begins a journey down the trail to treasure in The Hobbit, February 3rd through the 12th at Reinhardt Theater in Ashland. More at ctatheater.org.
We're talking about artificial creativity in this hour. And here's my question. When a computer program fixes a writer's novel or improvises a few bars of music, is that real creativity? I mean, even the smartest learning program is still just doing what humans programmed it to. Blaise Aguera y Arcas is a tech visionary at the forefront of artificial intelligence. He currently leads Google's Machine Intelligence Group in Seattle, where he brings together artists and engineers. He tells Steve Paulson that the newest deep learning models really can go beyond what they've been taught.
Yes, I think they can. Actually, before I answer, I should say, though, that when you talk about rules, I think that that kind of critique or that kind of analysis applies a lot better to what some of us now call GoFi, good old-fashioned AI, the so-called AI of the 80s and 90s. The programmer writes a bunch of rules and the computer carries out the procedure, follows this or that branch in the decision tree. And a system like that can never surprise you. It really is just the playbook or the rule book that the programmer generated.
Right.
That's not how these modern systems work at all. What's really interesting about the modern systems is that they start off as these disorganized neural networks. So a bunch of model neurons wired up in a random way. And then they learn from example. And as you teach examples, they do develop concepts, they do develop understanding of some sort. And I think that one can use that term in a legitimate sense. And I'm not by any means saying that they're conscious or that they have ideas or that they are creative, but I am definitely saying that surprise is possible with a system like that.
Are you then saying that these very advanced machine learning computers that they've developed their own sense of aesthetics?
I don't think that you could call it aesthetics, no. Aesthetics implies preferences and it implies an artistic vision, and they don't have those things. But they do, if there are patterns in the data, they learn and figure out those patterns. And one of the very powerful things about this new kind of machine intelligence is that these things can notice patterns that we haven't noticed. That's why systems like AlphaGo, the Go playing machine intelligence, can beat human players in ways that are really surprising to the human players. They notice patterns, they see things that human players didn't.
You're talking about, if we come back to the world of art, then you're talking about the capacity to create a new kind of art that humans could never dream up because, I don't know, there's a different kind of logic when it comes to machine learning.
That's true. When we see some of the things that get generated or hallucinated by deep neural nets, it's a really trippy and weird kind of art, and it's not something that I've seen any person paint. Yeah, it is new and different, sure. And it is its own in some sense. But I also don't want to overdo the sort of anthropomorphic argument. This is not the same as saying that they have consciousness. It's not the same as saying that they have an aesthetic principle. What I'm really saying is just that there are concepts that the system has learned that weren't programmed in. And the way those concepts get kind of, refracted back, is new. It's new because, these are not quite the same kinds of brains that we have. They don't have hands. They don't have the same kind of motor system that we do. And so it's expected, I think, that what's generated will look really different from a human artist sketching with a pencil, say.
That's totally fascinating. You're saying we might have a totally new kind of art because of machine intelligence?
Yes, I'm sure that that's the case.
And this is, and now you've been talking about sort of collaborations between computers and humans, but what if we get rid of the humans here? After the original programming is done, it's just this other generation of machine learning. You're talking about that.
Sure.
That in itself could create something amazing.
Sure. Yes, I think that's all entirely possible. I'm not worried about artists not having jobs anymore over the next few years, but I do think it's absolutely possible for things to be generated more autonomously or less autonomously. And again, one can relate this to the way, what it felt like to be a painter toward the end of the 19th century. Painter is what it meant typically to be an artist. There were all these debates about, if you're a photographer, are you a real artist?
Right.
Is the camera doing all the work for you? And I think there's similar kind of parallel conversations we could have here.
So has this stretched your own appreciation of art? I mean, have you seen, or I mean, I know that the technology is still in its infant stages, but have you seen I don't know, new kinds of art that you just sort of would never have dreamed of before that you really like?
Yes, yes, I think it has. I mean, on the one hand, it's made me look back at Cubism and at some of the things that Francis Bacon does with sort of heads in multiple poses and so on, because we see a bunch of that sort of thing happening with hallucination from networks that are designed to recognize faces, for example. So it's part of it is about sort of thinking about art as an experimental lab for human perception. So it certainly made me rethink a lot of that kind of stuff.
Now, you mentioned Cubism, and if we go back to Picasso's breakthrough,
Hmm.
it seems that, I mean, what he was doing was not only drawing on the history of art, but he suddenly was incorporating African masks. He had some intuitive sense of new psychological theory and sort of the fragmentation of the human psyche and all of this stuff.
Yes,
That
yes,
sort of
yes.
it seemed like it came out of nowhere. I mean, he was obviously drawing on sort of cultural currents in the air, and I guess I'm wondering
Right.
if computers can do that. I mean, to me, that's like real creativity. There, it's like bringing together stuff that no one had put together before.
Well, yeah. So I mean, his bringing in all of those other influences, whether from psychoanalysis, from African masks, that new stuff getting stirred into the pot is where the really interesting business comes from. I guess, and maybe this is a little controversial, but I have um, I'm not always crazy about the kind of great man theory of creativity. I think we often impute genius, we impute agency where it doesn't always belong.
So even someone like
Um,
Picasso, maybe he wasn't as original as he's cracked up to be.
well, I'm not trying to diss Picasso. I mean, I think he's spectacular. I love Picasso, but I also think that this idea of oh my God, it came from nowhere. It's genius and so on. I think it's that's a little bit trivializing and simplifying out some of the more interesting things about what was going on. It was special partly because of his exposure to those things and the fact that he was bringing them to the European academe for the first time. Could computer art or art generated by machines do similar things? Sure. I mean, we're mixing in alien stuff in the same sense that African masks were alien to Europe in a lot of those kinds of ways, just by virtue of aiming some of these algorithms at training data that might be non-traditional. We're already doing that.
So where do you
So yeah.
where do you see all this going? I mean, what's the future of artificial creativity?
I'd be very surprised if in 20 years we don't have art that everybody acknowledges. That by that point it'll be normalized enough that even the critics, will think about this kind of stuff as mainstream, and there will be great art that uses these kinds of techniques just as a matter of course. And we won't even think about it as computer art as such. I don't think.
Will we have a new kind of Turing test? Was it created by a computer or not?
Well, I think that more fundamentally, the question is flawed because whenever art is created, it's always created by some kind of hybrid between what we think of as people and what we think of as technology. When I use paintbrushes, when I use a camera, when I use Photoshop, this is technology and it's not separate from us. We are a technological species. Your body and my body are both covered in clothes. If you strip all of that away and and we are, I don't know, naked, in the wilderness, we are less than the humans that we are right now in a lot of ways.
Right. I
So
mean,
I,
to
I
some
don't
to
I
some
don't see
degree,
that
the
distinction.
advances of human civilization, which includes human creativity, is because
Right.
of the way we've been able to use technology.
Entirely technologically mediated. Right. Maybe, dancing naked might be the only form of creative output that isn't technologically mediated in some way.
Will there always be some kinds of human creativity that computers will never be able to do?
No. I think that anytime one says yes to a question like that, it almost feels like waving a red flag in front of the bull of future history.
Especially for
I just,
someone like
I,
you. You don't want to say, no, that's impossible.
right. You really risk making a, why would anybody need more than 64 kilobytes statement.
So even the great novel, I don't know, War and Peace, the great epic novel that seems to express something timeless
Mhm.
about human nature. You're
Yes.
saying computers in the future will be able to write those?
I think it's like asking, will you ever be able to take a picture that looks like a Caravaggio? The answer is yes. If you set up a studio very carefully, or you, for that matter, you use Photoshop or something to, synthesize brushstrokes that look realistic, right? Then you can set up, a photographic situation in a studio that takes a picture that looks like a Caravaggio. Doesn't diminish Caravaggio, and it doesn't diminish modern painting. Um, but I'm not sure the question is even interesting, if that makes sense.
I
Sorry,
guess I'm trying to
off more
hold on
obnoxious
to
than I
some
meant.
shred of human originality here, and you're kind of blowing that idea out of the water.
Well, I'm not that into human exceptionalism, I suppose. I'm not sure that I buy it, and I think that our investing a lot of our identity in this idea of being exceptional relative to our machines is um, that seems like shifting sands, and it seems like it's in a way denying what is most interesting about our humanity, which is our ability to shape our environment and to grow in ways that, exceed the capabilities of our own body, collectively, individually. Why are we so invested in that?
Well, this is totally fascinating and kind of mind blowing, I have to say. Thank you.
Great, my pleasure.
Blaise Aguera y Arcas leads Google's machine intelligence group in Seattle. Steve Paulson talked with him.